When I was a grad student back in 2001 is when I started writing about them in a literary magazine in Spain, and I titled Amor y Cohete. So I did the translation. I started talking about their work, their amazing work. And since then, I've been writing about them. I have 6 heavy-duty academic articles, many divulgative, as we say, articles about their work. So I cannot imagine my career without thinking on the work of the Hernandez brothers. And I think this happened to many scholars in different grades and levels. They will always reach, if they have to think about alternative comics and literature, they will have to reach their work because they are unique in that sense. They open the door to thinking about comics in a different level. So we are super happy to have here the Hernandez brothers, and they allow us to think about many aspects of creativity. So for this conference, they are ideal for all the different characters they bring to us. So it's a great pleasure to have them with us.
Thank you. Yes.
And I'm just going to say, by way of introduction, Anna and I were talking about sort of proper or full introductions, and we kind of immediately realized that even though it's a cliche, if there's anyone who does not need an introduction, needs no introduction, it's these two. And then we thought, well, the film also provides such a rich introduction. We didn't think it was probably necessary, at least for this audience, to go through the history again. It's been told many times now. Gilbert and Jaime are exceedingly generous, I would say, in granting interviews, and there are many terrific interviews out there where you can get the story, though, again, the documentary itself gives you a very rich sense of that history. So Anna and I said we wouldn't rehash it. But Anna and I also were commenting that, again, as scholars, both of us have a now fairly long history with these astonishing creators. But I was going to tell everyone in the room, some of the people here know this, that in addition to these public events, the Mellon Sawyer seminar has been meeting for the last year in smaller groups. A number of the people in this room have been regular participants in that activity. And the last time we met, we often meet in advance of the public events to sort of plan and talk about what's happening next. And the last meeting we had prior to this event was to talk about the Hernandez brothers. And Anna and I immediately revealed to many of the students we're working with that whatever academic credibility we had, it just sort of fell by the wayside when we just sort of gushed as fans. It was impossible for us to sort of stand back and say, well, as a scholar, this is what I have to say about them. I just love Maggie. I just love Hopi. This is my favorite story. Oh, this is amazing. And so, I'm more than happy to lose whatever, academic respect I may have, thin as that might be, to admit my fandom. And I'm going to insist, as a sort of introduction, one more time. I said a version of this last night, and I know this might not always be the popular view, but I'm going to stick with it, that I have always thought of Love and Rockets from very early on. I didn't encounter it with that very first issue, but soon after. I've always thought of it as, for all the significance of the words love and rockets in the title, I've always thought the key word is and. And for me, it's always been Gilbert and Jaime. It's always been, they go together like, peanut butter and jelly, Laurel and Hardy. I've always thought it's the pairing. And for me, that means, and I brought samples in case anyone, I can't believe anyone in this room would be in this position, but if you've never actually seen the comic book, the magazine, my reading has always started with the comic where you get, as it were, a double feature. You get the not intertwined. I mean, the fascinating thing is 2 strands, but the stories of each of the brothers, to me, bouncing off each other. My background is in cinema, and so I think I've always thought of this as a version of montage. I've always thought of it as a sort of, even if not literally, splicing the worlds of Palomar and the world of the locust together, I've always thought of them as sort of playing off of each other. And so this is why, it's a mild objection, I promise, but that I've never entirely understood the republication that separates the stories into the two stories. They're, as you said last night, they're long stories. They benefit from being collected in those forms, but I'm going to lean hard on that and. I've always thought, Gilbert and Jaime, love and rockets, as that combination. Every now and then, cruel people will ask me if they find out I'm a fan, Gilbert or Jaime. No, I won't do it. I'm not going to choose Fred Astaire or Gene Kelly. I'm not going to choose one or the other. I've always wanted the two together. And so this is a very roundabout way of saying I'm very delighted that we have Gilbert and Jaime here together as a team, as a pair. And I'll start us in a discussion. I'll just give you sort of a game plan. Anna and I are going to ask some questions. We have some images that we may draw upon. We'll see how the discussion goes. And then we will watch the clock, and we're going to leave time for people to ask questions. We know many of you want to engage with Gilbert and Jaime, so we'll make sure that that's possible. But I did want us to begin with questions that are based on the focus of the seminar. Again, the concern with racial reckoning through comics, but which has meant for us throughout this past year questions of racial representation, including the kinds of issues that Kiana was raising this morning, the historical past, which is, to put it mildly, is not a particularly attractive or respectful tradition. And then but we didn't want, the whole seminar to be sort of a downer. And so what we've also wanted to do throughout the past year is celebrate more recent work, and particularly the greater range, the greater diversity of representation. And this is, to say an obvious thing, where these two are absolutely crucial, groundbreaking figures. But we wanted to raise some questions about this very topic. And I'll start with this for both of you. Could you say something from the 40-year looking back perspective about how your thinking or your practice of questions of representation, I guess I'll summarize, how that evolved. And I'm going to put this in, here's again the academic rather than the fan side of me coming out, that for quite some time, scholars have been raising questions about what gets called diversity, multiculturalism, more recently intersectionality. And one of the things a number of comic scholars have recognized looking at your work is, oh, that's what they've been doing for 40 years. That's the kind of work they've been putting on paper. It's one of those cases, I think, where the scholars and the scholarly vocabulary are sort of catching up with what you people were doing in practice for a long, long time. But could you say something about how the understanding that you were providing different representations than the history of comics before you, how did you understand that as you've moved forward these past decades?
Gee whiz.
It was organic, actually. It just was, well, we're Mexican-American. Let's have some hot Mexican-American chicks. A lot of it was just indulgence. We liked drawing pretty girls. I mean, that was how it started, We would try to draw superhero comics, and it just didn't, it didn't mean anything. It was just images and stuff. But it just was sort of like, well, if we're going to be original, we got to be ourselves, and we have to pull from our experience and our, basically frame of minds, I guess. I don't know, it was just organic, wasn't it? It wasn't like, it was like, well, this is, for me, like when it started, it's an underground comic, so we can do anything we want. Well, why don't we do something that means something to us? Because when a lot of people think of underground comics or whatever, they just think of outrageousness or just something to grab attention. Well, that's fine, but we were like, well, we're going to tell our stories just because they're more interesting than a Spider-Man comic at the time. You know, by the time we started Love and Rockets, we were so bored with mainstream comics. We were desperate. We'd look at, you know, Heavy Metal magazine. We'd look at the Arcade or something like that, just because it was coming out. It was different comics, but nothing. It was just moving away from any kind of impact the way the '60s had with you know Marvel and even DC. There was no longer an impact in comics. It just meant nothing. Just you know, nostalgic entertainment. It was nostalgic to have Spider-Man comics and this and that. I mean, people can like Spider-Man and Batman and all that stuff, but it wasn't for us. We were just growing out of it. We were also like into the punk scene because I was, you know, the energy of it, and we were just into the different. That you could just be different. You could be yourself and be different at the same time. So that was part of it, right? Is it?
Yeah, and it was like in the beginning, the comic was such like we were throwing our whole lives in it, our whole past, since we were drawing when we were little, and throwing everything in there, and then throwing things in that we learned as we got older about, you know, different people, and I remember going. I remember like, okay, let's see. Okay, I don't see lesbians in comics. Okay, maybe Hopi's a lesbian, but that's all it was. I just said, maybe she is. And I remember, though, going, ooh, I better do this right, you know, because I don't want anyone mad at me for, you know, and I should do this right. And so so more than like reading a book on it or whatever, I just started observing friends, different friends, and how their gripes and their way they dressed or something like that. And it was really kind of like, you know, I don't see this out there, you know? And I think it was just pretty much paying respect to whatever I threw in there, you know, to a person, you know, different diversity, colors, and all that. And I just wanted to do it right, you know, but still maintain my own vision, you know.
Right.
Like say, we, you know, in high school, and you know, we go to parties, and you know, and there's some great stories about going to crazy parties when you're young, you know. And that's not in movies, that's not in TV. You open up a comic book, and there's nothing about that in there because there's a bunch of old dorks making comic books. So we were young dorks. So we decided to just put that in there. I go, these are funny stories. This guy we know that works at the gas station is an interesting character. I don't care what ethnicity he is. He's an interesting character. We just looked at that and go, this is more interesting. I mean, and like Jaime has always mentioned this, we had nowhere to fall. So we could just indulge ourselves with serious things as well as, you know, just goofy stuff. You know, we could just, wherever we wanted to go, we could go. But we had to corral it because otherwise it would just be all over the place, like the first issue of Lum Rockets, you know, just all over the place for fun, you know. And once people started looking at it and they thought it was important, and like I remember you were just bugged all the time, like, well, are Maggie and Hopi a couple? Are they? And that was important to people, so we took note of that. That was important to people, and I thought, oh, they don't see themselves in other comics. They just see, you know, people don't see themselves. And all that stuff was it was kind of a challenge. It was like, well, we're going to challenge the mainstream. We're going to do our stories our way because people are starting to like our comic. You know, it wasn't a big thing, but we heard enough people liking it because of the way we were doing it. We just went, you know, we just kept rolling, going with that.
Yeah, and this is going to sound silly, but I tried to be a grown-up doing this. You know, even if I was having my silly little fun drawing rockets and robots, I still thought, I'm going to be grown up about this and be responsible, basically.
Let me pick up on that. I mean, it may be already a response to the question I was going to ask, which is, and this touches on the presentation this morning, that one of the remarkable things I want to say that you both accomplished, and I don't think this is just my humble opinion, this seems to be the general view, is that you avoided stereotypes. You avoided caricatures, racial and ethnic specifically, but also in gender and sexual stereotypes. There were stereotypes of what a lesbian looked like or how lesbians acted, right? In addition to the, maybe more familiar and more pernicious racial stereotypes. And I'm going to say, too, that, this is something the underground didn't particularly successfully avoid, reliance on those sorts of stereotypes.
Right.
But, and as I said, maybe you already answered it, you wanted to do it right, you wanted to be responsible.
Yeah.
But can you say, so now I want to shift to, how was that accomplished visually? How was that accomplished in the ways that in this visual medium, the way you drew the characters? I mean, there's getting it right in terms of their actions and their words, but what about the images?
Well, here was a thing that I learned early on, was that you only give them so much. I gave you Maggie and Hopi hanging out, being close, being inseparable, and I let the reader fill in the rest, because I'm not a lesbian. I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be a lesbian, and so I kind of portrayed who you see on the street, and you fill in the rest. Some people got it wrong, but I couldn't really tell them they got it wrong because this was their interpretation. I like to engage the reader by giving them only so much, and they fill in the rest. And most of the time, almost all of the time, our readers got it. There was only a couple of times where someone would ask me, when you did that one character, it seemed weird. She seemed this and that, and I go, oh well, that wasn't that's not what I intended, or I don't like that character, and I go, well, okay, you don't like that character, it's like that person on the street you don't like, that's how we treated it.
Right.
So many people in the early days, and some people, they liked our comic, but they was like, well, but why isn't this like Batman? Why aren't you going there? We go, and then I was arrogant. Fuck Batman. I go, how many people have drawn Batman and written Batman? Okay? How many people have written and drawn Love and Rockets? So it was like, Batman's just, he's a product, by now, And you can have fun comics and movies and stuff, but it just had nothing to do with what we were interested in, but yet people wanted to pull us back. Where's the rockets? Where's the this and that? And I go, you can find that in any comic. You can find rockets and monsters and all kinds of daring do in comic books. We just wanted to be different because it's more interesting to hang out with our friends, to go to punk clubs, to represent our, people that we've known growing up, our families. That was just more important. It was just more enriching. It was just more interesting. And we figured, and it was a simple reason of it's original in comics. It just wasn't happening in movies, TVs, or anything else. So let's just do it. But it wasn't to we weren't carrying a flag or anything. It was more like we just want to do this. This is how we like it. It was simply liking it, really.
It was the natural process of the creative process. And as we were discussing, Corey and me, there is certainly pieces where are very for didactic motives when you teach comics and you bring comics to the classroom. There is pieces like, in this case, the jump from the comic book, because when you have to bring comics to the classroom, to the pedagogical space, you need a book. So I can see when Fantagraphics decides to open their feet on the bookstores and try to sell comics as books. So it's when the compilations came. Love and Rock X, for example, Gilbert piece is a piece that is very, very important and very I've been using over many years in the classrooms to teach and to explain the crossover, the many ideas that are represented on the characters, because there is two characters, Riri and Maricel, who are going to from Palomar to the U.S., and suddenly they are confronting different problematics. Can you speak a little bit about how you were thinking you remember to work with that characters. And
You're talking about Love and Rockets X
exactly,
coming to America?
Exactly, coming to America. So I think most of the people know that your characters are from Palomar.
Yeah.
And Palomar is somewhere in Latin America, as we say.
Yeah.
So suddenly they have to move and they have to encounter themselves to develop their love story in some way, to be able to be themselves, as you are vindicated, and to grow on the American-U.S. experience and how they encounter themselves with the language limitations, with the different conflicts there, and how you been, as we see in the cover, as Corey will say, you are representing different aspects.
I did it because I was tired of just doing Palomar all the time, and I was only because Palomar is a microcosm. So, and one of the important things about Palomar is they didn't know anything about the rest of the world. They didn't have phones. They didn't have cars. They didn't have anything. So I liked having a simple life for them. But then as time passed, I go like, I don't have any rock and roll stories. That's really a big part of my youth. I love rock music. And there was a lot of things about America and a lot of stuff going on, movies and things like that people in Palomar would be very, either weren't exposed to or weren't interested in. So that's fine for Palomar. But what about the rest of me? The part of me. So that's why I started doing but I wanted to keep it in the Palomar sphere, universe, because this is really indulgent. I write best when it's any story I write or characters are linked to the original Palomar stories. Even if they were never there, at Palomar or whatever, I write the best comics when there's just a little drop of Palomar somewhere in their adventures, where it's a distant relative or this and that. I just love when the writers, the characters write themselves. And that's how it works for me. So there's links to Palomar in Love and Rockets X and them coming over.
Exactly, and these pieces are to give context to people from late 80s, early 90s. So we are seeing, and when you were, can you tell us how you were working on the cover? Because, Corey, you were explaining, yes, that...
Well, for people who don't know this, I mean, if you don't know it, run out and get a copy. But this is a story that does deal quite explicitly with American racism. It's one of the main themes of it. But a connected topic so I've shifted here. Here's one of your casts of characters. This comes up in the documentary. I think it's Justin Hall who raises this really interesting issue that one of the obvious signifiers of race tends to be color. Skin color, skin tone. And the fact that you both work, almost entirely except for covers, typically in black and white, means that you don't have that tool.
Right.
And so one of the things that I've often found sort of remarkable is in reading the comics, and there are signifiers of race and ethnicity there, but they're not handed to me in the most convenient way by color. But occasionally then I'll get a cover and I'll say, oh, I didn't know that character was so light or dark or whatever it might be. So could you say something about, this is getting at, the visual aspect of representing race or ethnicity, how black and white, and this is a particularly diverse cast, how black and white functions there.
Well, okay, I'll try to be brief and you can go. It was always a problem for me personally, that it was in black and white because I've got different colored people, and they're only on the cover. And here, I digress a little bit. Most of the time, the colors on our covers are atrocious. The black people on our covers, most of the time, this is actually an accident of something happening good. They're usually green or just oversaturated colors that we had imbecile art directors working on this stuff. Imbeciles that just could not see color, and they would always deny. I go, you guys are colorblind. Get somebody, this is fine, but it's too dark. And it's not, only because of the way it's printed, not because he's too dark as a black person. No, it's too dark as printed, And this is just like, what, you know, and you see this in the documentary. I go, where'd they go? I just see these silhouettes because they were such shitty colorists. I have to say this, Ivan. And I even talked to Gary Groth about this. He goes, yeah, we just hired guys that knew how to do it, but they had no concept of coloring and how to measure colors and screens and all this stuff. It was super low budget, Love and Rockets, super low budget. So they couldn't afford. I go, why don't you just hire a colorist, a real one? You know, they couldn't afford it. You know, it was just a guy off the street that worked at Front-O-Graphics, and then he put these shitty fucking colors. This one's a nice one. This is good. But if you'll notice, there's a green tint to a lot of these characters that I go, why are you putting green in it? He goes, well, that's the proper mix over there. So I'm sorry, I'm going off, but I had to talk about this because it's been driving me crazy for 40 years. So I'm doing dark-skinned people, color them properly. You know, and once in a while he would. Once in a while. And then other times... The 11 Rockets 14 in particular is really bad. It has the white American guy in the front, fine, he's fine. And I have the three Palomar characters in the back, and one of them is literally green. Oh, I'm not colorblind. Well, what fucking color is this? I mean, anyway, I'm sorry. I have to get off this chest. I've been off my chest. I've been holding this back for 40 years. So now things are better now, but I cringe when I have dark-skinned people on the cover because I know sometimes... You know, because they'll send it to me and I look at it and it looks fine, but once it's printed, it looks atrocious. So that's just me.
We may have an exclusive.
You can talk about color.
For Jaime, I'm going to hop to, well, here's a mix of characters, but another black and white and color.
Yeah, have you noticed the green hue, green tint? Yeah. I'm sorry. What? Go ahead.
What?
Similar, how you've thought about
your experience with the covers.
signifying race and ethnicity while working in black and white, where you don't have color as a tool.
You just hope that the features help. You know,
The character's features.
Other than that, I don't know. I just well, one thing. If you wanted to make clear that a person was a certain color, you put that on the cover.
Yeah.
Didn't always work, like you said. But you put it on the color so when you see the cover and you see the person inside, you know. You know, and I still do that, you know, with covers. I put the person on the cover that has a different shade than the other
I
characters.
think I may have one here.
Yeah, and
Anita, yeah.
and yeah. See, so you know, Danita's this color because you saw her on the cover, and that's it. Nothing real.
Not like my problem.
But you know what? See, I was married to a woman who did color things and stuff, Coco, and she taught me certain tricks how to keep it, or maybe I taught myself. I don't remember, but it was like, so when they were coloring your stuff, they added more blue. All the time I always had them add more red, and that's why mine didn't turn out green. You know, after a while when I kind of figured it out. So it was just like, you know, little tricks that you learn away after all the mistakes. You know.
I don't know if you want to comment on this or not, but this is a sequence I like where Ray is, well, he wants to paint Maggie and she's not behaving, and so Danita comes in and he's going to paint her. So you have here, you know, characters that, again, maybe based on the covers, we know have different coloring.
Right.
But here in black and white.
Yeah. That was a fun story to do. What's the question?
So,
Back, well, we don't need to run this into the ground, but again, I think this is fascinating. I'm taking off from, I think I've got it right, it's Justin Holland documentary, who points out, I mean, that you're handling racial diversity without the most obvious tool that, you know, and troubling tool that we have, which is to say skin color is what marks racial and ethnic difference.
Sometimes in the writing or the dialogue, you can get it across without hitting them over the head.
Yeah.
You know. Other than that, take your chances.
I can go to another. I skipped over an example from Gilbert that I'll warn people here. This has some sort of rough language, but this sequence in X where characters are questioning the sort of racial purity of characters. But again, we're dealing with images that are black and white.
And with that part there, I just wanted to express that even within the community of people of a certain culture, they hate each other. You know, you're light, you're dark. You don't act this way. You don't like the right music. You don't do this. You know, and and I just put that in that scene because the one hard guy with the bandana, he's dogging the guy who's half black and half Mexican, and so, well, what are you? You know, which side are you on? I'm just me, whatever. So that is within the community. I didn't want to go too crazy about it because then people would start going, see, they're crazy people. No, I just wanted to have it, sprinkled in there, but not necessarily the whole theme.
And I included that page because I think it's one of the ones that really captures the sort of diversity of this community that you're depicting, wide range of characters.
Well, this story is about racism, so,
Exactly, and also it was a story where you were including elements of what was happening in the real news. The Salvador the killing of the
that had
priest.
just happened, yeah.
So there was an awareness, a sense of society, things were happening in society, how society was reacting at this moment, this horrible killing of the Salvadorian priest and the ladies who were there working. So things were happening somewhere in Central America. The characters were receiving that information. They were hate in the community. So for you, were like a conscience.
I was conscious of, I've always noticed how people react differently to something like that. So, that's something horrible, like priests are being, murdered because they're priests. And I just thought, and then you talk to people about it, and some people would just say, "Yeah, isn't that horrible?" Or like, "What? That's not NASCAR? What are you talking about?" And so I just thought, sometimes people care, sometimes don't, and because a lot of that information we just got on the TV news, but I would see that some people go, "God, that's horrible," and they would really take it deeply, and then other people just, life goes on. Why are you so worried about that? So I just wanted to put that in the story to just expose that.
No, and it's very, very interesting because the world you were representing, in some ways, when you go deeper, is that society, is that time. Now I think we are overflowed by news in how media is handling news in a different way. So there is not a creative space for reflection. That here is a sample of creative space for reflection about conflict, racial conflicts, and as you say, in a more critical way, it's not about white and black. It's about all the shadows in the human condition and the conflicts and the fight for power and how that goes in different levels. So that's very interesting. You were aware, you were very young when you were working in that. You were aware of it was the natural way of creating, expressing.
But it was always simply the time, because that's, I got the information about, the priest and stuff. And then it just snowballed into, do people care? Do they not care? And this and that. And then but it's just of a time, because I never did a story like that again, because I know if I'm going to do this story once, but I'm going to do it right. I really worked hard on getting it done right. Whether it got done right or not.
It wasn't done right.
It was just I wanted it to be one story, and because I was going to go back there unless I got new information on something like that. But I didn't. I like to move on, And,
Yes. Thank you.
And I know you've both been asked about these things a lot, and I'm just going to say I think you're both fated to answer these questions for the rest of your lives. But we want to talk about, this has come up a little bit, not now the exclusive or near exclusive focus on race and ethnicity, but gender and sexuality. It's probably for women in the room to say this, but many, and not me, many women have said this, so I'm relying on their confirmation rather than mine. But the general view is, this is covered well in the documentary as well, is that you both have had a remarkable ability to represent women and non-straight sexualities in your comics. And you've already said, to some extent, this is a question of being an adult and being responsible and paying attention, something. But I think it's just a persistent fascination people have. I've told some people in this room a story that a comic book I used to go to, and this was in the time, well, maybe we're not out of this time, but a time when comic book shops were not particularly warming to women customers. But one I used to go to had a woman who worked behind the desk, often the only woman in the store. But she and I, actually, we bonded over Love and Rockets. I would buy Love and Rockets, and she'd say, "That's my favorite comic." And so we'd talk about Love and Rockets. Folks, I think a couple folks from the comic book shop are here and know that I'm a really annoying customer because I always go in and ask questions. What are people buying? And what about this? And what are people saying? I'm doing my homework. And I used to see occasionally in this former comic book shop young female customers, and I would say to the woman working there, "Oh, don't see women in here very often. What's going on?" She said, "Oh, they come in to buy Love and Rockets. They come in to buy Sandman and Love and Rockets, right. And then eventually manga." But she would say, they come in the front door and they say, "Is there a new Love and Rockets?" And she'd say no, and they'd turn around and go out. The day that there was a new Love and Rockets, they'd come in and buy something. And so, this goes way back, this audience. And you've already said also that you've been, especially responsive to your audience. You recognize people like your comics, and you seem responsive to those people. So again, I know it's a familiar topic, but I think it's of endless fascination. So could you say something more about how you've understood, even, you have these vast, casts of characters, but I think it's fair to say, central to Jaime, your work is Maggie, and central to your work is Luba. And even to say something about why women became the central. I know it's an odd thing to say given the range of characters, but...
Total indulgence is that we can draw women characters. So if you're going to draw women characters, you got to make them the character. You go, "Why don't you draw a guy?" I go, "Well, a woman character can do the exact same thing a guy can do, and I prefer to draw a woman." It's simple as that. It's just whatever type of woman, I guess. It was just, and it was new. It was like Jaime's characters, his Maggie gang. Nobody had done that. Like I said, nobody had seen that, and it was something we had seen in real life. So another thing about the women thing is partially, and I didn't mention this in the documentary, but we used to watch movies all the time, and from the 40s and stuff, and you watch a Bette Davis movie or Joan Crawford and stuff, and it's about the women. There's nobody's like freaking out. What? Women? What's this about? No. And I figured, wow, those people are more intelligent than comic book creators. No, I'm serious. I'm going, comic book creators must be morons if they don't even know that existed. They don't even know that there's a world of, you can use different characters, different, things. And you can watch an old 1945 movie with, Vivian Leigh and go, well, and it's a movie about a female character. And it's a great actress and good script and everything. Why isn't that in comics? That was missing in comics for so long. I mean, as good as a lot of the great comics from the 60s, especially the Marvel boom and stuff, Stan Lee couldn't write a woman for nothing, man. She was just in there, which is fine, Black Widow and all that stuff, that's fine. But he couldn't go any further than that. It wasn't, there's no depth to it, Not that there was depth to the guys, but at least there was angst. At least the Thing was self-pitying, and Spider-Man didn't know what he was doing. At least there was that. But the women characters were like, "Oh, I feel faint," So I just knew that they just didn't know how to do it. I love their comics, I still do, but they just didn't know how to do it. And as we grew up, they just didn't get it. So we just slowly but surely figured it out. For ourselves.
Yeah. And I mean, beside the fact that I love women. Period. End of sentence. I mean, I love women for everything over here to over here, and here and here, and I would rather draw a woman walking through a door than a man. Simple as that. It's always the hardest question to answer, but that's all I can think of. I just want to do it. I want to do women. I want to draw and write.
Part of it, I think, is unconscious to where it's more of a challenge. If I draw a guy coming through the story, this and that, that's just me, and I'm writing a story about a guy. But if you use a woman character, no matter what she looks like or no matter who she is, you have to pay attention to the details. A woman might say something different, might just react to something differently in the context of the story, and that's a challenge to make it work. And so when people started liking the way we did it, that was rewarding, because good, we're doing something right, at least partially. So it was a challenge to just be better artists by doing that, by not going the easy route of just drawing a bunch of guys, superheroes or whatever,
Yeah, I guess, yeah.
Yeah, that's one answer.
And then I want to attach to that another, widely discussed element of your comics, but to me, it just still absolutely remarkable, that you decided to tell the stories of these women across the span of a lifetime. So not a static character, not, Betty or Veronica stuck in high school forever, but characters who change, characters who age. And I mean, you could say that about a number of Marvel characters. Well, there's change across time, but not the literal unfolding through time, not the literal aging and the change that comes through that. Character changes maybe, but you've probably discussed this before, but I'd appreciate hearing again. When did you start to realize, I'm going to let them develop, age, gain weight, get wrinkles, all of that, which both of you have done in your way?
I'll start it. Partly because it wasn't being done. I mean, and the more I found out that the more the characters moved on, the more they added weight or just added parts of their lives. As the story was going on, they were aging, and they started to know them better, and started to. And then I would do flashbacks when they were little, because I loved my childhood and they should be able to do this too, kind of thing. And I remember the more they went forward and the more I went back, the more they were a complete person. And it just worked, and it just felt right. And I knew where they'd been. I know where they're going. I know when I do a story and Maggie's not there, in the back of my head, I still know where Maggie lives. It's like we're sitting here and my girlfriend's at home in California, and I know that, unless she's out. But just I just treat it, like they're not lines on paper, blah, blah, blah. But it works. I know that, I don't know, something as simple as I know where my hotel is from here. It's just a thing that while my whole life right now is right here with all of you, I still know there's a comic store down the street. There's the restaurant we were at. There's I don't know if I'm going off on a tangent here, but it's just, I need to know there's a whole world going on when I'm doing my characters, because that just makes them more real. And it's just something I think about. I think naturally about it now, and it's just I don't know. It's like this isn't the only thing going on. There's things going on all over the world, and I think about that when I'm working, and but it's not like okay, I'm going to do a comic now. What's going on in South America or something? No, it's not like that. It's just like here I am at my little drawing board, but there's a lot going on.
Exactly. There is a universe in your head. And
Yeah.
it's very interesting because that kind of sensation is since the beginning when you start with Maggie going to work away and there is these letters that they are sending. So you were needing your characters to communicate and you were trying to find the way how they were going to interact if they were away. Or even when you send Isabel to Mexico to have an experience, and maybe we can see some images in how Isabel is going to is not Maggie and Hoppy, it's another characters because there is as you can see many female characters very strong in the world of both of you, and suddenly you are sending one of your characters, one who was babysitting one of Maggie and Hoppy, so to Mexico to confront their own life and to fight their own monsters. So it's very interesting in the way how you suddenly Flies on the Ceiling is summarizing the experience of Isabel going to Mexico and trying to find her demons. So, and how did you came to put Isabel in that situation?
It started out that Flies on the Ceiling was a whole different story when I started, and it took almost 10 years to come up with it. It was always in the back of my head while I was doing the other stuff, and it was originally about her. I'm a writer. I'm finding out my background. I'm going to go to Mexico. I've never been to Mexico, but I'm going to go and find my roots and stuff. And she was going to be totally humiliated by, it was nothing like she had pictured. But then as the story progressed, I cut out all that first part and I put her just there in Mexico looking at the floor. And it starts there. So this is Flies on the Ceiling was kind of part 2 or part 3 of this whole long story, but I thought, no, I just want to do part 3, I just thought, if you're going to find out who you are, do you go so far back to what was before you? I mean, do you, her parents or whatever, grandparents or something. I didn't take that too seriously. I just thought Mexico was a good place to have all this happen because it just took her away from the world she knew. And so everything that was happening to her was like she wasn't in charge.
And the interesting thing is the story of this woman who has this conflictive past with her family, with herself, that suddenly goes to Mexico to try to find her roots, but at the end she confronts her demons, and it's a comic that you took 10 years to develop, but right now when everyone read, and I will tell everyone you should read all their comics and Flies in the Ceiling, is a fantastic example how any reader can feel empathy about ourselves searching for our own demons. So there's this local character that suddenly is fighting for her own writings, goes to Mexico to have experience, but the reader is going to realize about our own demons and how we fight in life with our own demons. And sometimes we look things in different places, trying to find ourselves, and we find our demons. So it's very fascinating. It's why we can say there is this kind of literary sensation on the work Jaime and Gilbert do, because the reader find themselves in different places just for the way they narrate things, the silence in the pages, the things that they are there but they are not there. We don't see explicit like in other comics book that we have to figure out. So in both cases, it's amazing how they work with the narrative form and the artistic form. So yeah.
Yeah, something that Anna and I were discussing recently was you are both understandably given so much credit and attention for your art, but probably not enough for your skills at storytelling. And ability to tell a narrative and long-form narratives, multi-decade narratives. The equivalents in literature are things like Proust or Faulkner's, reliance on going back to that same county, things like that. And I just don't think that as writers of narrative that these two have been recognized in that same way. And Jaime, I'm glad you mentioned, because I may have created, if anyone doesn't know, the impression that when I said the span of a lifetime, that Maggie only ages and moves forward, but we get this very rich return to childhood and, moving back and forth, very rich and complex use of flashback structures, in effect. And Gilbert, I want to ask, you've done something similar, but also to me, really wonderful and sort of unique in that, so as part of the Palomar universe, you've got characters who have been film actors, and what you've given us are their movies. You've illustrated not just their lives as actors, but the movies that they have made. And that strikes me as another version of this filling out a bigger sweep.
That was pretty much, I was tired of figuring out ways to put them in science fiction settings or coming up with science fiction stories, because I still like to draw nutty stuff, but it wasn't fitting in anything. So I just created a fantasy world, but I didn't want it to be an alternate universe. A fantasy world of, let's create a fantasy world of B movies that will never exist. I'm a big movie fan, but in my early days, B movies. And I thought, just because they inspired me as a kid, because you just see monster movies or whatever, film noir, things like that. And I just didn't. It's hard, like I said, it's hard for me to write cold, write a detective story, write a story about a dragon, about going to the moon and discovering da 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 da. I have bits of that, but I don't have a story. I don't have the entire thing. So I needed a character to jump in from the regular characters and to explore that stuff. And it writes a lot. It's a lot easier to write. And I don't mean easy as in tiredness. I mean easy as in it flows. I gotta do this. I'm gonna do this. So I took the most bland characters of mine, Luba's half sister, Fritz, but I kind of liked the character because she was kind of like a zero. All the other characters have this fire in them, this spice, but she didn't, and I didn't know how to handle that. So I just used her as the person who's going to be a type of person that's very quiet and doesn't talk, but they have all this going on inside. I actually have her as a good actress, and she picks only bizarre film roles, and that was really it. I just wanted to tell bizarre stories. I went in over my head because it's hard for me to do, because a movie has to be a certain length. So I was doing graphic novels, and that wiped me out, man. So now I'm doing them in chapters, and then I'll collect them. But at first I was doing a couple of the graphic novels all at once, and it slowed me down so much with putting out comics that I just learned, I'm not a graphic novel guy. I'm a serial. I do serials, and then we collect them. But then when you think about all the classic graphic novels that people still love, like Watchmen and Mouse and Dark Knight and that kind of stuff, they're all serialized. Yeah. None of them is right off the bat a graphic novel. Some are, but those are the most influential ones, and they were serialized. So I thought, well, if they can do it, I can too. So, but anyway, that was just that. It was kind of an indulgence. I really liked just having B movies, in my comics, but I just didn't want to crowded out with being by themselves. I wanted them being attached to what was going on in Lever Rockets. Anyway.
The first time I encountered this, I thought of it as something like there's a long novel, and in the middle of the novel there are DVDs, and you're told, stop now and watch this movie, and then pick up the novel again. It seemed to me remarkable. We are at an hour, and I know people want to ask questions. So let's shift to you folks, and we have a microphone.
Any question?
It was my problem with coloring, right? Is that it? Is why it was
Nobody.
Don't be shy.
So I haven't read a lot of comics in my life. I have done more movies, but I see the connection, and I'm very interested in the themes that you have covered in your comics. So I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about your families, where you grew up, and how those experiences influenced you. It seems to me, it sounds like you grew up in a place like Los Angeles or Chicago or New York instead of Iowa, right? And so because it does matter, right? Where you had a community that you could relate to, or you could at least got you going in the beginning. And so I'm curious how that, and also the fact that you seem to be still, even though you're brothers, you're still friends and you collaborate, which I'm the oldest of 5 and nobody's talking to me right now. So
Okay.
I know, I think that's sort of, there must be a secret.
Well, as far as the brotherly love thing, Jaime and I are separate completely, absolutely. If we want to do something together, we will, but it's rare. Sometimes we're asked to do jam covers. We're not crazy about that, but we'll do it because of, it might help something. But we leave each other alone. I'm completely doing my own thing, and he's leaving his. So there's no clashes. There's nothing. We don't, cross each other's lines. We just don't, because I already know that he's going to pull out, his half of a quality work in Lemon Rockets. I already know that. It's been proven to me I look at it as an outsider. Like, okay, I'm looking at Lemon Rockets. Jaime's stuff's already there. I don't have to worry about it. I have to worry about my own stuff. So I don't even think about Jaime when I'm doing my own comics. I got to do this right. I got 16 pages here. Let's figure this out, and then Jaime does his, and we put it together, and it just works out. But that's just that. The other thing is, you want to talk about growing up in Oxnard?
Yeah. I grew up in Southern California, Oxnard, about an hour away from L.A. Grew up in our little agricultural town that our world, growing up, our world was 2 blocks long, and we had a lot of relatives who told us stories about where they came from, and we just had this wealth of stories from relatives and our mom and our dad, and it was just really exciting, to hear these stories. Mom talking about growing up barefoot poor. She made it sound like the best life that anyone could ever have, and it was just very exciting. And so we were just getting all this, plus B monster movies, and all of this stuff. We had cousins. There was 1 million kids on the block. There was always someone to play with. It was just very enriching, and something in my 2 oldest brothers, Gilbert and Mario, they were very curious. They were always very curious about information and entertainment and things like that. So they were constantly searching out stuff out there, beyond the comics. There was always something, and I was 4th in line in the family, and so I didn't have to do anything. Whatever they brought to the house, was already there. But I'm just wondering what would happen if my 2 brothers were not curious. How my life would have been. But it was just very, very cool, and even if we had our little 2-block radius, there was something magical about just it's the way I saw it.
Any other question?
We're just born to do it, really.
Well, looking at the panels behind you, reminds me that the influence of movies, I think, and you can talk about it. There's a sense of montage, and there's a lot of panels without any dialogue. And it reminds me a little of 1940s movies. And I was wondering whether that was right, where you're really thinking in terms of, for me, that would be the light show, the late 1940s movies, and maybe Joan Crawford, I don't know.
Yeah, we just love movies. Movies just because our mom always had the TV was always on. We had a small house. TV was always on, and mom was always watching old movies. So that was the norm for us. It wasn't like kids don't watch. Parents don't show their kids black and white movies, and that's why people don't like black and white movies. Simply because they weren't trained to like them. My daughter is fine with black and white because we watch black and white movies constantly, and she has no problem with it. Oh, is this in black and white? Ew. No, or is this a reader? Subtitles. That's what people call them, readers. No, she's fine with it. So I'm just saying. So I knew that's what happened to us. They were on movies. Frankenstein movies are black and white. I'm not going to skip Frankenstein because it's not.
So then, when you make these, are you a film editor?
In a way.
That's what I was really getting at. Is how you.
Yeah. When I do my comics, I'm not thinking of lines on paper. In my head, it's cinematic. I'm always thinking about movement and stuff, and then I have to use my knowledge of how to turn it into lines on paper, and to move it, just like a movie. So, I never think about it being lines. It's always moving. Maggie and Hopi are always moving in my thoughts.
I want to slip in a question here that this opens for me. You have occasionally, I'll use the film metaphor, you've recut your comics. When they've been reprinted in book form, you've expanded or added or... Is that...
the outtakes. We put them back in.
I was going to say something like that. Or is that the director's cut or something?
Actually, yes, absolutely. It's we take out so much stuff out of... Look, every issue of Rocket, it's 16 pages for Jaime, 16 for me, but all my stories are 30 pages. I have to hack these things down to 16. And then, if I can't do it, I'll make it a two-parter or three-parter, And that's how that works. It's just, I don't know.
I do that less now. I don't add stuff now anymore, but there was a time where I would just add like 10 more pages to a story, but cut in between what was going on.
When I'm doing it now, I do add pages to things because the books, as collected, fall short of the page length. Seriously, simple things like that. A graphic novel should be roughly 96 pages. That's the best. That's the shortest it should be. People do 80 pages. I like the 96-page thing. So I finish a story and I go, whoa, I've got 10 pages blank. So instead of creating a new story or pin-ups or whatever nonsense, I'll just add a section for the story to simply make it a better story, really. Because normally everything's chopped down to the minimum, to as far as we can.
And that is the beauty sometimes to do research. Like you go to the original Love and Rocket pieces, booklets, then you see the compilation, then you see for the British version there is one extra page and you realize it's not in the original thing. So for people who study comics, it's delightful. It's like when you study poetry and you see third edition of a book of poems, then there is changes on the poems, things like that. It's a beauty. And also the beauty of over these 4 years, if you study, if you go, you see all the change, the drawing, the evolution of the drawing, the themes, how they evoke, the complexity of characters, the introspective, because I think your maturity also as humans goes with the living experience and how you project your own living experience on the introspective aspect of your characters. And that's very delightful to see.
So to add pages, like what you're saying is that it's really important. Like, well, if I want the character to be better and more enriching experience for the reader, that gives me this chance now. So it's though having the extra pages isn't padding. It's like I have a chance to make it richer and have more of it, because I need to do these 8 pages, So there's that. I do feel guilty ripping off the regular readers though. That you buy the comics, people love it, and then they see the collection and go, I don't remember this. It's because you have to buy the collection now. So I'm a thief.
This is why I have to double dip.
Hello. So, yeah, this is working. Okay. So you're keen observers of and inspired by life and music and obviously films. Do comics nowadays play much part of your life outside from your own?
Not a lot. Not a lot. Only because I'm busy. I'm just constantly busy. I work 7 days a week because I can't stand being bored. I can't stand having nothing to do. Because I can, after I work during the week and stuff, I can watch a movie at night. I don't want to watch movies all day. I don't want to go out all day because I go, well, I got stuff to do. I have a chapter to finish, So it's not like a full day, 7 days. Like one day will just be a couple of hours or whatever. But I just need to keep doing it. It could be my age that I'm thinking like this ain't lasting forever. So I work a lot. Maybe that's what it is. I don't know about you. I mean,
Yeah. What was the question again?
current comics influence.
Oh, current. No, I mostly concentrate on my own. Every once in a while, something will come along, but it's usually nothing like my comics that I will pick up. But it's rare. I mean, I still go to the comic store once a week, and 99% of the time I leave empty-handed.
Or you're buying reprints from the 50s.
Right.
I just happen to like comics from those up to the early mid-70s better than anything else. So I look at, I'm not criticizing, but I look at the comic store and I'll pick up a new comic or something and I just see sludge. I don't see storytelling. I don't see good art. I don't see anything I'm interested in. But that's just my old man's vision of modern storytelling. That's all the way I see it. I don't want to dismiss it like they don't know how to do it anymore. They don't know. They just don't do it the way I used to like to read comics. That's all. It's just a different thing. Although there are a lot of critics who say Marvel and DC are just eating themselves alive with this stuff. They're not progressing. They're just making it more gooey, because the movies took over. And the movies are starting to poop out. So we'll see what happens with comics. There's always a comeback. Comics always come back. So we'll see how that works out. Yeah.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
I had another question related to like the racial reckoning theme we're in. I was about colonialism. I was thinking about how did you feel it in your stories, because I feel I'm halfway through the Locas volume right now, and I was reflecting on it on the mechanics chapters. There's a lot of issues about these countries, these tropical countries Mag is going, and how there are dictators in there, how how that is happening for her, but also her being from a family of immigrants, and how does that relate? All of these stories. I feel also Palomar is kind of clearly influenced by it. I wanted to know more about it, and I have more questions, but
well, I did the Maggie, in the deep jungle kind of those stories, and that was all fun because I didn't know how the world worked yet. I would just read the news or watch the news, and they would say something, this country is under siege, blah, 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 or something like that, but I didn't really take it to heart. So those early ones, I was just throwing that stuff out, and some of it I'm a little embarrassed about because I just didn't know what was really going on, and so that was all. It was kind of as much fluff as the Rockets and Robots, and that. And so I look back and I think, wow, this was such a learning experience for me because I was just putting everything I wanted to in the comic, but a lot of it that I didn't understand, you know, and I cringe sometimes thinking about but one thing I always focused on mainly was just Maggie as a person. You know, Maggie as this person, that this is all happening around her, that as long as I kept with her character, then I would be happy and stuff like that. But no, I really didn't know what I was doing.
And I think this is part of your question. Also, we dealt with, more me, I guess, dealt with immigrants because our dad was from Mexico. So we knew that he was, and his English was he never spoke, very good English. For us, that was normal, So you would go out in the world and it's like, he can't talk, that kind of stupid shit. So, made my characters immigrants and the good guys. It's really, we would do a lot of spins like that. Like people that were considered lowlifes or jerks or idiots or whatever, we would just spin it and make them the good guy, Like, you can draw a certain character and immediately, like in a regular comic, you go, oh, well, this is the bad guy or this is the idiot. And we would just draw somebody that looks exactly like that, but they would be the good guy. Oh, this guy's like, he's really heavy and he's really homely in this. I go, but he's not the bad guy. He's not the guy we're making fun of. And that's what kind of shifted people's, even in the mainstream comics, they started shifting the way they depicted different looking people. It wasn't always, this is the villain, this is the idiot, this is the ugly person, this is the beautiful person. It started to blend, like in Love and Rockets, we blended it. Some were good, some were bad, this and that. So anyway, I'm kind of, tooting my own horn here, but that was a big influence on mainstream comics. They started to change characters and how we look at them, diversity.
And thanks for that. That's so cool. I wanted to know, I know you've talked a lot about how your movie influences and comic influences, but I also wanted to know if you had like more narrative text written influences or poetry influences, because I feel like there's a lot of, I don't know, like great uses of narrative like tactics, I don't know, to write.
We fake it.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Really, a lot of it is faked. I mean fake like BSing you, not that kind of fake. Just kind of like, well, this guy, this should have a poetic moment or something. And so I'll try to call from that. Find the place where that's going to work for the story. But if you'll notice, it's only in little bits. I would do a whole story that's like, what you're talking about. It's like, I don't know. It's like, this guy's a poet, and I never show the poetry. It's like, I don't know. I guess that's your question. I don't know.
Yeah, or for example, in the mechanics parts, this whole text that is written in cards, right, in letters.
Oh,
yeah. There's a style in writing letters, right, and thinking about what's going on simultaneously. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. I think I can't remember how I came up with the letters. I think I just wanted. I wanted this big jungle adventure, this and that, all this pain, all this suffering, all this, But I wanted to keep Hopi involved in Maggie's life. When I was doing the mechanic stuff, the rocket mechanic stuff, I always kept Hopi out of it because she was supposed to be grounded in the real world. To her, Maggie went on an exotic trip. Like she went working out of the country. Mm-hmm. That's all. That's how it was to her on Earth. Maggie was the one who I hung out with a dinosaur and stuff like that. That had nothing to do with Hopi. I just wanted to separate that. So yeah.
Thank you.
You mentioned you would sometimes pick up some comics from like the 50s through 70s. What are some of those classic comics that you reread time and time again?
wow, which ones didn't we read? And it's like, yeah, God, there's just so much. And since everything's been since starting the '80s, everything has been collected in volumes. My library is just overstuffed with just comics. It's hard to say. I think some of my favorite comics ever are Dick Tracy comics. See, nobody cares about Dick Tracy now, but I do because I grew up with that. And they've been collecting them for about 20 years now, the entire run of Dick Tracy. But like Jaime said, once you get to 1950, if anybody's interested in Dick Tracy, start with 1950 because it was like they let a crazy person make comics, and and it was on the front page of the newspaper. On the Sundays, the newspapers were wrapped with Dick Tracy, and I'd have to go to the grocery store, and I was scared of Dick Tracy because there was monsters in it. There was like ugly people in it, but they were kind of like in the real world. I mean, they were talking normal, and they talked, they always had a cigarette puffing, and so. And then I realized that this is years later that I realized that a lot of things that Chester Gould did was from a fetish point of view. That so much of Dick Tracy, especially in the 50s, is all the angle is just super indulgent, fetish indulgences. Really weird stuff like giant women and just like teams of teenage girls that are criminals, but they're acrobats. And everyone goes like, well, that's comic book stuff. That's fetish stuff. And that's what's a lot in mainstream comics. It's been since the 40s, and people never recognized that. They didn't realize all this stuff is fetishy. A lot of it. So anyway, I love Dick Tracy, and I just have Marvel comics. Loved them in this, because here I go again. I'm 3,000 years old, so I remember the day my older brother brought home the Fantastic Four #1, and nothing was the same again. So we didn't know. It was sort of like we didn't know that Fantastic Four was going to start the whole. A superhero explosion, Marvel, DC competing, and all that. We didn't know that was going to happen. It was just we liked Jack Kirby drawing monsters, and that was it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. No, so a lot of it is I go for artist mostly. I read it second if I read it at all. Mm-hmm. I like old just artists who were good at their craft. I don't know. I'm trying to think of names right now. I like to get like old Rory Crane, Wash Tubbs, or Buzz Sawyer strips. He was excellent cartoonist, So I got to watch everything move through his style, and his style was a bit cartoony, but it was just exactly what the strip needed. Of all the comics I grew up on, the ones I still hold on to now from my childhood, say the early 60s, is Archie and Dennis the Menace, because I loved the particular artists who were the better artists of the series. They just had a better storytelling quality, where when I was a kid, I wouldn't read them, I would just go through the panels. Bam, bam, bam. Bam, bam. And that just showed what good artists they were, where I didn't need to find out what the secret was in those words, And Dennis the Menace had an artist that did that. Archie had a few, and so they taught me how to cartoon, which is really important. More important to me than drawing or writing is cartooning, is just an artist who can move you from first panel to last panel. And I learned a lot from that. And I've had people tell me, like, I read your new comic. Good old 5 minutes. Read the whole thing in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. And I'd go, oh, whatever. Now I say, yeah, but that comic's going to stick with you 20 years from now. That 5 minutes is going to expand if you liked it, of course. And they read it in 5 minutes because I learned how to move you through it. Shoom, 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 shoom. and hopefully that experience was worth it, where you're going to go back and read it again. There's another 5 minutes, and again, there's another, you know. Those were mostly the old comic cartoonists that I carried. And of course, like he said, Dick Tracy.
And I feel the need to contextualize this a little bit, that when I and friends of mine discovered Love and Rockets, maybe not at the beginning, but something 30 years ago, 35 years ago, and you were starting to get attention and you were doing interviews, particularly did a really long Comics Journal interview. These were, cover your ears, this was the coolest comic in the world, and these were the coolest comic creators in the world. Punk rockers who made comics, what could be cooler than that? Then they start to do interviews, and people say, what are your influences? To hear them at that time say, Little Archie comics, not just Archie, but Little Archie, and Dennis the Menace, those were like the uncoolest references you could make. And I know it wasn't just me, it blew people's mind to think, that's what influenced them? They're not naming, Crumb or whatever, and I've used this often. Jaime, you say in one of these early influences, and I've used this to talk to students about how I think an artist sees things. Steve Ditko comes up, creator of Spider-Man, and at some point you say, he drew the best pants.
Oh, yeah, trousers, yeah.
And the best trousers. And I thought, what? I go back and look at early Spider-Man. It's true. They're the most amazing pants. The folds in them are perfect. But I didn't know. I'm paying attention to, Spider-Man's got these troubles. What's he going to do? He's paying attention to how he draws pants. And I think, that's a way I don't see.
I have to mention Ditko briefly because this is recent information I got about him. Ditko, from the beginning, he wanted to be a comic book artist, and he wanted to bring comics. No fine art, no nothing, da-da-da-da. He wanted to make comics the thing, and he believed in it. He went nuts at the end, but so will I when I'm his age, when I got that old. He just, and that was unusual because everybody's always highfalutin, like, oh, this is just a job, but I'm really going to do something else, which they never do. It's kind of like the Hollywood attitude. Well, I'm doing this, but I'm really a genius, and that never happens. But Ditko, from the beginning, he wanted comic books to be the art. He really wanted it. He couldn't get a job at EC because I guess his art was too crude or something, or the timing was bad, I think. Oh, no, he tried to hook up with EC, and I think it was during the Frederick Wortham thing where DC was just, EC, the monster comics were destroyed. So he had to go to all the copy companies that had, Charlton and places like that. But his concerns, and I think this is wonderful, he was to make good comics, make better comics. Like you go to the comic and that's what you're there for, not because it's a movie adaptation or it's about a painter from Europe or something like that. No, it was telling stories through comics, and that really impressed me because he's one of my favorite cartoonists.
I have a question about earlier talking about the depiction of different types of skin tones and the covers versus the insides. And was there ever any consideration or experimentation with screen patterns, zip-a-tone or using ink washes, or with newer technology like Photoshop? And
for me, I thought that would be get in the way, from me and my hand. If I wanted a pattern, I would draw it myself. Take a long time, but putting the pattern on that couch takes me a half hour, But I don't know. It just it was just those other tools. I just never wanted them to get in my way. I don't know, my ego or something. That I just wanted all me in my hand. But that is a good point. I mean, that it would help Also cross hatching to make the skin look darker or whatever. That just kind of, and I did that a lot in the first issues, and I just started to draw as the stuff progressed. I just started to keep what I thought it needed, and I don't know how. It was not like a research thing or anything. It was just like, well, I don't want to draw cross hatching anymore. I want to make. Instead of 100 lines doing the work, I wanted that one line to do the work of 100 lines. I don't know how successful that ended up, but it was just something that I kind of thought that would help the work.
And
more than anything.
And we had a lot of inspirations. We had a lot of places to look, because if you look at our Crumbs work that we loved and Mobius, it was in the early days were cross-hatching and all that stuff. And that's great. And then you'd go over and look at a Dennis the Menace panel by Hank Ketchum, who's a brilliant artist. He didn't ever cross-hatch or anything. It was all just one line. Everything's one line. So you can make a choice. Cross-hatching, one line. And Jaime gravitated toward the line work, because if you look at a composition of a Dennis the Menace panel, you might not like the jokes or whatever, but a good Dennis the Menace panel is perfectly drawn. And the most important thing, perfectly humanistic. That was his thing about he was an animator, can't catch him. And I'll get to that too soon about the animation stuff, is that he was an animator, so he just knew how to make it flow. He just knew that pen, and he just knew it, and he was just brilliant. And some of the cartoonists we're talking about, especially from Archie, they came from animation, or that was their job for a while. So that's where a lot of the smoothness comes from, and the storytelling ability, to a degree, So normally we dog animators drawing comics, but it helped some guys. Some of those folks did well because of it. I think.
Unfortunately, that was the last question.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.